When 26-year-old Fiona, 7 months pregnant and widowed, stood before the rotting remains of a Maine cabin, her wealthy in-laws' cruel laughter still echoed in her ears. They thought they had left her with absolutely nothing. But as Fiona pushed open the heavy hidden door beneath the floorboards, she realized the joke was entirely on them. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Gable, Walsh and Associates in downtown Boston felt more like a tomb than a law office. Outside, rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the bleakness that had consumed Fiona Jenkins's life for the past 6 months. Fiona sat awkwardly in a high-backed leather chair, her hands instinctively cradling her swollen belly. She was 26, 7 months pregnant, and utterly alone. Her husband, David Harrington, had died in a tragic pileup on Interstate 93, just weeks after they discovered she was expecting. Since David's death, his affluent, aristocratic family had treated Fiona not as a grieving widow, but as an inconvenient pest, a middle-class outsider who had somehow tricked their golden boy into marriage. Across the sprawling table sat the surviving Harringtons. Anna Harrington, David's mother, sat with a posture so rigid it looked painful. She wore a tailored black Chanel suit, her neck adorned with a string of pearls that probably cost more than Fiona's entire childhood home in upstate New York. Next to her was Ryan, David's older brother, aggressively checking his Rolex and sighing with performative impatience. They hadn't offered Fiona a single word of condolence. They hadn't even looked at her. At the head of the table sat Mr. Theodore Gable, a senior partner in his late 60s, organizing a stack of heavy, watermarked documents. They were gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur Harrington, David's eccentric grandfather, who had passed away at the age of 91. Arthur was the only Harrington who had ever shown Fiona an ounce of kindness. He was a self-made industrialist who built Harrington Steel and Logistics from the ground up in the 1960s. While the rest of the family bathed in old-money pretension, Arthur had preferred faded flannel shirts, cheap black coffee, and the quiet company of his dogs. He had loved David, and to the family's endless disgust, he had loved Fiona, often telling her she had the grit this family lost 2 generations ago. Mr. Gable cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. "If we are all settled, we shall begin. The estate of Arthur James Harrington is substantial, and his instructions were unusually specific." Anna leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed greed. "Let's just get on with it, Theodore. My father-in-law was not of sound mind in his final years. We simply want to ensure the legacy is protected." Mr. Gable shot her a disapproving look before reading the dense legalese. As the distribution of assets began, Fiona felt her chest tighten. She didn't want millions. She just wanted enough to pay off the crushing medical debts from David's hospital stay and secure a small apartment for her and her unborn daughter. Since David's bank accounts had been frozen and legally tied up by Anna's ruthless legal team, Fiona was down to her last $800. "To my daughter-in-law, Anna, Mr. Gable read, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "I leave the primary estate in Beacon Hill, as well as the controlling shares of the holding company, valued at approximately $42 million. Anna offered a tight, smug smile. "To my grandson, Ryan," the lawyer continued, "I leave the vacation properties in Martha's Vineyard and Aspen, along with the liquid assets held in the offshore Cayman trusts, totaling roughly $18 million. Ryan smirked, leaning back and crossing his arms. It was a massive windfall. The Harringtons were already rich, but Arthur's death had officially elevated them to untouchable wealth. Mr. Gable paused. He looked down at the paper, then briefly up at Fiona. His eyes held a mixture of deep pity and genuine confusion. Fiona's breath hitched, and finally, Mr. Gable said softly, "To Fiona Jenkins Harrington, widow of my beloved grandson, David." Anna scoffed loudly. "Let me guess, a pity payout. $50,000 to go quietly?" Mr. Gable ignored her, though his hands trembled slightly as he read the final clause. "I leave the entirety of the property known as the Whispering Pines, located on Parcel 4B in the township of Oakhaven, Maine, including the cabin, the acreage, and all contents within." The room went dead silent. Fiona blinked. "A cabin?" Suddenly, Ryan burst into loud, barking laughter. The sound was harsh and violently mocking. Anna quickly joined in, covering her mouth as a cruel, icy chuckle escaped her. "The Oakhaven cabin? Ryan wheezed, slapping the mahogany table. Are you joking, Theodore? He left her the dump? Fiona felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. I don't understand, she whispered. Oh, you wouldn't, sweetheart, Ryan sneered, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. Grandpa Arthur bought that plot of land 40 years ago for practically nothing. It's a rotting, collapsing shack in the middle of nowhere. There's no running water, no electricity, and half the roof caved in a decade ago. The town condemned it in 2015. Anna sneered, looking Fiona up and down with absolute disdain. Well, it seems Arthur finally saw you for what you are, Fiona, a squatter. Now you have a dilapidated shed to raise your bastard child in. I suppose you can chop your own firewood. Fiona's vision blurred with unshed tears. She looked at Mr. Gable, silently begging him to say there was a mistake, a trust fund, a bank account, anything. But the lawyer simply looked down at his papers, his face pale. Is there any liquid capital attached to the property? Fiona asked, her voice shaking. A stipend for taxes? I'm afraid not, Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Gable said gently. The deed is transferred to you free and clear, but there is no money. In fact, Arthur specifically stipulated that the property cannot be sold to developers. You either take ownership or forfeit it to the state. The laughter from her in-laws swelled again, a toxic symphony of arrogance and cruelty. They had won. They had stripped David away. They had hoarded the empire. And Arthur, sweet, eccentric Arthur, had seemingly lost his mind at the end, leaving a desperate, pregnant widow, a pile of rotting lumber in the wilderness. Fiona stood up. Her legs felt like lead, but she refused to let them see her cry. She grabbed the manila envelope containing the deed from Mr. Gable's desk. Thank you, Mr. Gable, she said quietly, maintaining her dignity. She turned to Anna and Ryan, who were still chuckling. Goodbye. As she walked out of the heavy double doors, Ryan's voice chased her down the hallway. Enjoy the mosquitoes, Fiona. Send us a postcard when the walls collapse on you. For 3 days, Fiona sat in her dingy, month-to-month rented room in Somerville, staring at the deed to the Whispering Pines. Her situation was dire. Her landlord had slipped an eviction warning under her door that morning. Her bank account balance was $412.30. She had a mountain of David's funeral expenses hanging over her head. Selling the cabin was out of the question due to the bizarre legal stipulation Arthur had put in the deed. She couldn't sell it, but she owned it. She remembered a conversation she'd had with Arthur just weeks before he died. He was frail, sitting in his sunroom, breathing through an oxygen tube. He had squeezed her hand with surprising strength and whispered, "When the wolves come, Fiona, go to Oakhaven. Don't trust the eyes of others. Trust the foundation. Promise me." She had thought it was the dementia talking. Now, looking at the official deed, a desperate, irrational spark of hope ignited in her chest. Arthur was sharp. He was a brilliant businessman who never made a move without a calculated reason. Why would he leave her a condemned cabin while leaving his ruthless son and daughter-in-law the keys to the kingdom? With no other options, Fiona packed her entire life into 2 duffel bags, loaded them into the trunk of her sputtering 2012 Honda Civic, and began the 5-hour drive north to Maine. The journey was exhausting. The further north she drove, the more isolated the world became. The endless highways gave way to winding, cracked asphalt roads lined with towering, oppressive pine trees. Her back ached, her swollen ankles throbbed, and her baby kicked restlessly against her ribs. Oakhaven wasn't even a proper town. It was a forgotten logging hamlet that time had left behind. When she finally rolled into the local gas station, a crumbling establishment with a single rusty pump, she was running on fumes. She walked into the adjoining diner, hoping for directions. The place smelled of stale grease and old coffee. A rugged man in his 60s, wearing a faded Carhartt jacket, looked up from his newspaper behind the counter. "Help you, miss?" he asked, his eyes lingering on her pregnant stomach. "I'm looking for a property," Fiona said, her voice raspy from the long drive. "Parcel 4B. They call it the Whispering Pines." The man's eyebrows shot up. "Arthur Harrington's old place?" He let out a low whistle. "I'm Bill Henderson, town clerk, diner owner, and whatever else pays the bills around here. You a relative?" I was his grandson's wife," Fiona said. Bill frowned, pouring her a cup of